They told him it was illegal. A government inspector showed up at his property in rural Alaska. The inspector didn't understand it. His neighbors didn't understand it. And honestly, when you first hear about this, you won't understand it either. And his house was 55 degrees in the middle of February, while everything outside was frozen solid at minus 30. And his house was 55 degrees in the middle of February, while everything outside was frozen solid at minus 30. The inspector didn't understand it. His neighbors didn't understand it. And honestly, when you first hear about this, you won't understand it either, because nothing about it makes sense on the surface. A $300 system, no moving parts, no fuel, no electricity, and it works forever. That sounds like a scam. It sounds like the kind of thing a guy in a trench coat tries to sell you in a parking lot. But stay with me, because what I'm about to show you is one of the most well-documented, scientifically proven, and deliberately overlooked heating systems ever developed. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how it works, exactly how to build it, and exactly why the heating industry has spent decades making sure you never find out about it. Let's go. The ground beneath your feet is one of the most powerful thermal batteries on the planet, and almost nobody talks about it. Here's the thing most people don't know. Once you get below about 4 to 6 feet underground, the temperature of the soil stops changing with the seasons. It doesn't matter if it's the middle of a brutal Alaskan winter or a scorching August afternoon. Down there, the ground stays at a remarkably consistent temperature. Depending on your region, that number sits somewhere between 45 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit every single day of the year. Think about what that means. While the air above is swinging from minus 40 in January to 80 degrees in July, the earth below your feet is just sitting there, steady, calm, storing thermal energy like a giant underground thermos that never runs out. This is called geothermal mass, and humans have been using it for thousands of years. Ancient Persians built structures called yakchuls, massive dome-shaped buildings with underground chambers that used this exact principle to store ice in the middle of the desert. The Romans ran air through underground corridors to cool their bathhouses. Native communities across the Arctic have used semi-subterranean homes for centuries to stay alive in temperatures that would kill a modern man in hours. This is not new knowledge. This is ancient knowledge. And it was rediscovered, formalized, and tested by engineers and architects in the 1970s during the oil crisis, when suddenly everyone in America was desperate for a way to heat their home without paying to the nose for fuel. They called it an earth tube. Some called it a Canadian well. Others called it a ground-coupled air heat exchanger. The name doesn't matter. What matters is how it works. And what matters even more is why it disappeared. Here's the basic system. And I want you to picture this as I explain it, because it's simpler than you think. You bury a pipe, usually somewhere between 50 and 200 feet long, at a depth of at least 5 feet underground. One end of that pipe opens above ground with protected intake cap. The other end connects directly into your home's ventilation system. That's it. That is the entire system. When outside air is minus 30 degrees in February, it enters that pipe and travels underground. As it moves through the pipe, the surrounding soil, sitting at a steady 55 degrees, transfers heat into the air. By the time that air reaches your house, it's been warmed by 50, 60, sometimes 80 degrees. Not from a furnace, not from burning anything, just from the earth itself. In the summer, the same thing happens in reverse. You're pulling 90-degree air through a pipe surrounded by 55-degree soil. The air gets cooled before it enters your home. Passive air conditioning. Free. Forever. No fuel. No refrigerant. No moving parts except for a small fan, which some builders eliminate entirely by using natural convection. The operating cost of this system, once built, is essentially zero. The maintenance is essentially zero. The lifespan is measured in decades. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because the system isn't just real, it's been proven, tested, and published in academic literature going back over 50 years. Kansas State University, the University of Minnesota. Research institutions in Germany, France, Canada, and Scandinavia have all studied, verified, and endorsed earth tube systems. There is nothing fringe about this. There is nothing unproven. This is peer-reviewed, engineered, documented technology. So why don't you have one Let's talk about the heating industry for a moment, because this is where things get uncomfortable. The residential heating industry in the United States is worth over $70 billion a year. That includes furnace manufacturers, propane suppliers, natural gas utilities, HVAC contractors, maintenance companies, and the massive web of distributors and retailers that sits around all of them. Every single one of those businesses depends on one thing: you needing to buy heat over and over every single year for the rest of your life. A system that costs $300 to build and then runs for free doesn't fit that model. Not even a little bit. Now, I want to be precise here. I'm not saying there's a shadowy boardroom somewhere where executives decided to suppress this technology. What I'm saying is something more mundane and more insidious than that. I'm saying that building codes, contractor licensing requirements, and equipment certification standards have been shaped over decades by industry lobbying. And those codes make it genuinely difficult, sometimes technically illegal without a variance, to install a primary ventilation system that doesn't meet certain mechanical standards. In some jurisdictions, a ground-coupled air system requires a certified HVAC engineer to sign off on the design. In others, it has to be paired with a filtration system that costs more than the earth tube itself. In others, it simply isn't listed in the approved methods section of the residential building code, which means an inspector can flag it as non-compliant even if it works perfectly. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how regulatory capture works. And understanding it is the first step to working around it. Now, let's build this thing. Because information without action is just entertainment. The first decision you need to make is pipe selection. This is where most first-time builders make mistakes, and it's worth spending some time here. A well-built earth tube system on a 100-foot run at 6-foot depth in interior Alaska can realistically precondition incoming air from minus 30 degrees to somewhere between 35 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a gain of 65 to 75 degrees from a system that costs you $300 in materials and a weekend of digging. Does that heat your house to 70 degrees? No, you still need supplemental heat for that. But here's what that preconditioning actually means in practice. If your wood stove, propane furnace, or heat pump is working against 35-degree air instead of minus 30-degree air, it is working dramatically less hard. A furnace rated for a certain output doesn't have to run nearly as long. A wood stove burns through significantly less wood. A heat pump, which is already efficient, becomes extraordinarily efficient when it's processing air that's already been brought up to near freezing instead of starting at minus 30. In practical terms, builders who have combined earth tube systems with conventional supplemental heating report fuel reductions of 40 to 70%, not savings on a marginal monthly basis. 40 to 70% of their entire annual heating fuel consumption gone. In a place like rural Alaska where propane costs can run $800 to $1,200 a month in deep winter, that's the difference between financial survival and financial ruin. The $300 system doesn't replace your heater. It makes your heater almost irrelevant. Now let's address the Quonset hut specifically, because that's what you're seeing in the thumbnail, and it's not a random choice of building type. Quonset huts and their modern equivalents, prefab arch roof steel structures, have become surprisingly popular in cold climates for a specific reason. Their curved shape sheds snow load naturally. Their steel construction is durable and low maintenance. And critically, their simple geometry makes them exceptionally well suited for earth berming, which is a practice of pushing soil up against the exterior walls of a building to use that same geothermal mass for passive insulation. An earth berm Quonset hut with an earth tube system is, in engineering terms, one of the most thermally efficient residential structures you can build in a cold climate. The earth berm keeps the walls from losing heat to the outside air. The earth tube pre-warms the incoming ventilation air. And a small supplemental heat source, a wood stove, a propane wall heater, a small heat pump, handles the remaining load with minimal fuel consumption. This combination has been built and lived in successfully across northern Canada, Scandinavia, Russia, and Alaska. It is not theoretical. There are families living in these structures right now who heat their homes through minus 40 winters on a fraction of the fuel their neighbors use. Some of them heat primarily with firewood they harvest themselves. Some run on solar and a small electric resistance heater As backup, a few have achieved what amounts to net zero heating, meaning the passive systems carry the load so completely that their supplemental heat is essentially emergency backup only. Here's what nobody talks about on the internet when this topic comes up. Radon. I'm going to give it to you straight, because ignoring this would be irresponsible. Radon is a naturally occurring radioactive gas produced by the decay of uranium in rock and soil. It seeps upward to the ground continuously. It's colorless, odorless, and in high concentrations. It is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States after cigarette smoking. An earth tube, by design, draws air through the ground and into your living space. If your local geology has elevated radon levels, an earth tube without appropriate mitigation can introduce that radon directly into your home's air supply. This is one of the legitimate reasons building codes flag earth tube systems for review. And it's a legitimate concern, not a regulatory conspiracy, just real physics with real consequences. The solution is not to abandon the system. The solution is to test first. Radon test kits are available for under $20 at any hardware store. You place one in your home for 90 days and send it to a lab. If your radon levels are low, below 4 picocuries per liter, which is the EPA threshold, you proceed with your build with confidence. If levels are elevated, you install a radon mitigation filter on your earth tube intake, an activated carbon canister rated for radon reduction, typically costing $150 to $300, and you retest after installation. This is not a complicated problem. It has a simple, inexpensive solution, but you need to know about it before you build, not after you've been breathing unfiltered ground air for 6 months. Let's talk about soil types, because not all ground is created equal. Sandy or gravelly soils have relatively low thermal mass. They heat up and cool down faster, which means their temperature varies more seasonally, and they transfer less heat to your pipe per linear foot. Clay soils are the opposite. High thermal mass, stable temperatures, excellent heat transfer. Moist soils transfer heat significantly better than dry soils because water conducts heat far more efficiently than air. What this means practically is that your system design should account for local soil conditions. In sandy, dry soil, you may need a longer pipe run to get the same temperature gain you'd achieve in 80 feet of moist clay. In areas with high water tables, the surrounding soil is perpetually moist, which sound problematic, but is actually ideal for heat transfer as long as your pipe is watertight. Have any doubts about your soil? Dig a test hole, take a sample, and have it analyzed. Your local agriculture extension office can do a basic soil composition analysis for free or very low cost. It takes 2 weeks and tells you everything you need to know about the thermal properties of what's under your property. One more thing, and this might be the most important practical point in this entire video. This system works best as part of a total thermal strategy, not as a standalone solution. The builders who achieve the most dramatic results combine the earth tube with several other passive principles. Thermal mass inside the structure, stone, concrete, water walls, rammed earth, absorbs heat during warm periods and releases it slowly during cold periods, damping out temperature swings. Heavy insulation in the roof and walls, particularly on the north-facing side, reduces the total heat load the system has to handle. Passive solar design, placing most windows on the south face of the structure, provides free solar heat gain during daylight hours, even in Alaska, where winter sun is low but present. Stack these principles together, and you get a structure that a conventional HVAC engineer would find almost confusing. The heating load is so low, and the passive inputs are so high, that the supplemental heating system almost never runs at full capacity. The earth tube handles preconditioning. The thermal mass handles overnight temperature stability. The insulation handles heat retention. The solar gain handles daytime warmth. And the backup heater sits there waiting for the rare, deep cold night when all of that isn't quite enough. This is how you build a house that heats itself, not with one magic technology, with a system of technologies that reinforce each other, all drawing on the same source, the stable, reliable, inexhaustible thermal energy of the earth beneath your feet. The inspector who told that Alaskan builder to tear down his system eventually backed off. After the builder produced documentation, engineering calculations, and a stack of academic research, the inspector granted a variance. The system stayed. The house stayed warm, and the heating bill stayed at zero. That's the actual story here. Not that this technology is suppressed. Not that NASA is hiding it. The actual story is that a system this simple, this cheap, and this effective has existed for decades. And the only reason you haven't heard of it is that nobody makes money selling it to you. The Earth doesn't send you a bill. The physics doesn't charge a monthly fee. The soil beneath your property is just sitting there, holding steady at 55 degrees, waiting for you to do something useful with it. Now you know how.